Hey, come here. Why aren't you running out? You get on the last few balls and suddenly your position is all over the place. What are you doing? Sound familiar? Well, it's not your stroke and it's not bad luck. It is the angles you are playing for. And most amateurs don't think about playing angles the right way, and that includes players who are very confident that they are playing angles the right way. Believe me, I was one of them. But once you get a grasp on when to play for hold angles and when to play for move angles, that one choice simplifies the whole game. And suddenly you're running out instead of getting yourself stuck again. So in this video, I'm gonna share some examples of common places we all fool ourselves into believing we've played the right angle when really we could have been making this game look a whole lot easier the whole time. Let's go. All right, let's get into this first pattern here. This is a 9-ball pattern. This is what I see a lot of players do when they see the 7 to the 8. They need an angle to get from the 8 to the 9. Let's just play this out. So I have played for an angle here. It's not very much angle, if I'm being honest. This is like a 15-degree cut. And this is where I think a lot of players make this mistake, is that when they play for angles, they play for a lot thicker angles than they really need to move the cue ball. Now, maybe this could have worked out just fine with a little bit more pace. Forgive the bad acting. All of this stuff is bad acting. You're gonna have to deal with it. I'll try not to do it in future videos. It was a bad choice. Let's move on. So this next way to hit the ball is instead to draw the ball instead of stop it. I'm trying to get a little bit bigger of an angle, give myself an angle to now come off of this ball, one rail up to the 9-ball. I think it's just a little bit too much angle now to be able to get that easily without using inside. So that's not the worst, but it's really not the easiest layout. Or not the easiest out from there. So let's move on here. I'm just gonna do this. I'm gonna do this over and over and over. I'm gonna show you different spots of the table that the cue ball gets to and why making a deliberate choice to move the cue ball in a different zone may give you a better option to get out here. Let's see what happens when I give myself a bigger angle. See how I drew this ball? I drew this ball, diamond and a half, 2 diamonds, just to give myself an easier angle to move from the 8-ball. This is where it gets interesting. This is where you have options. Let's look at the options. Option 1, which could be bad, is going 1 rail up, because this can happen where you scratch. Good acting, Nate, really good. Sorry guys. Option 2, let's play this out. I think I don't know if I draw it enough here. Option 2 would be to use a little bit of inside to hold for shape on the short side like this. You could use a lot more inside and try to force the cue ball. From here, you could force the cue ball to this side of the 9-ball with inside, but it just plays a lot less more natural. You have to put a lot more speed onto the hit. If you play short side, I know it looks like this zone is super short, right? It looks like half the size in terms of, where to land. I think it's just the camera angle, because if you look at where the 9-ball is positioned, it's very close to the center of the table. If you actually look at where the center of the rail is, it's here. This is the center of the table. So it looks like the 9-ball is further out to the side than it really is. So I think the short side shape is really not the smallest zone. So that is one option, to go 1 rail. Another option, if you're going to draw the ball again, is to go instead 3 rails. I bet a bunch of you were screaming, go 3 rails around the table. So this is stunning with outside. Take a look. Stun the ball. Cue ball goes 3 rails around. Now, the reason this is great is because if you stun the ball, this natural path of 90 degrees to 90 degrees to the short rail, it gives a much more natural path to come down table, and spinning with outside allows you to instead hit the long rail earlier up the rail, and then spin the cue ball into position here, just like I did. And that makes this zone, getting into the 9-ball with the right speed and the right spin, it makes that zone enormous for getting on the 9-ball. If I was playing a game, this might be the way I actually get on the 9 ball. Because I actually really love to stun the ball. I did a recent video on the stoplight drill where it was all about rolling the ball and using spin and cut to understand cue ball behavior. That is really, really useful for running out, and all of those ideas still come across here. But getting shape can sometimes be preference. And if your preference, like mine, is to sometimes stun the ball because it feels really good, it feels physical, and allows you a little bit more accuracy on the cue ball, then by all means, stun the ball. But here is the other way that you can run this out. Instead of drawing the ball, you could go forwards. Now, if you're in this position, take a look at the options. Let's consider stunning this ball with left spin to get up the table, right? This is a little bit tight into the 9. If you're gonna stun the ball, you might wanna stun draw the ball past the side pocket, and then you get a much larger zone for your speed here in the end. But if I'm being honest, there is a big reason why this doesn't always work. And that's because when you're controlling the bottom part of the ball, when you're controlling backspin off a cut angle like this, it is much harder to control that angle than it is to control a rolling ball. And that's where people miss out. So let's take a look at this next shot here. Oof, sort of got there, but not really. The speed was bad. And the speed was bad because I was contending with the side pocket. The side pocket was enormous on that stun draw path. So if I go back here, just take a look at how close I get to the side pocket here. It's a much bigger issue than it might sound like, because you could hit the point of the bottom side of the pocket, or you could hit the point of the top side of the pocket. And anywhere in between is bad. So there's really like between a half a diamond and 3/4 of a diamond's width that you could be running into the cue ball here. And it's really not that big, it's much bigger, because take a look at the angle from the other ball. Going in towards the rail, to be really safe from the point of the pocket, you have to be kind of down here. And to be really safe from the other side point of the pocket, you have to be, here, I'll say. Because if you make contact with this part of the ball, the edge of the ball is really close to the side, to the point of the pocket. So this seems like it might be, a thin area to strike the cue ball, or to move the cue ball. But I promise you, it's a lot bigger than it looks. And getting the right amount of spin, the right amount of draw, and the right speed on the ball to avoid that side pocket in this kind of situation, it's a lot harder than it looks. Now, you may say that's very easy and you would have gotten shape all day long, but I promise you there are more efficient ways to run out. So let's look at this again. If we're gonna try to draw the ball, a lot of players would actually choose to draw this ball straight up the table. It's a little bit more stun drawy, right, from this angle. You really have to get the right kind of angle in order to make that work. Let's see what happens here. Strike the ball, and I draw the ball up table. Great shot, Nate, except that the line is really bad, and the speed needs to be really, really good to make that work. The speed has to be perfect if you're gonna come up that close to the 9 ball, right? So if the angle to the 9 is this, I know it was closer to the 9, but let's say I hit it a little bit thinner or something. The speed would have to be perfect to get right here. You could try to draw the ball a little bit less and get the ball here, but then you're kind of contending, not really with the corner pocket here, getting a scratch, but it is somewhat in your mind. I think advanced players are really comfortable drawing their ball straight up the table, and I don't think that's a bad shot. It's just there are easier ways to get out. Let's get to where the real learning is. So this time around, I think I run the cue ball a little bit more forwards, and you might think, good angle. He's got about 25, 30 degrees. 30 degrees is a good move angle. Let's watch this, because the angle to the pocket here, even though it is somewhat of a 30-degree cut, 30 degrees here, right? If you kept going, that's maybe 25 to 30 degrees, right? A lot of people will say, that's a really nice natural angle to move the cue ball. But guess what? The cue ball still wants to travel down table this way. So I am fighting the physics of the table to move it back up. So what you end up having to do is not quite rolling the ball, or you have to roll the ball with a lot of side spin to get this to work. So let's see what happens. So I used a lot of side spin to move the cue ball up table, and I almost end up scratching. If I hit that a little bit harder, that would have been a scratch. Now you could say, oh, just use a little bit less spin or a little bit more spin, come into the rail here, right? That's not a bad option, sure. But the issue with that is that you are having to maneuver the cue ball in a place it doesn't naturally want to go. So what is the solution? I keep saying that. And this is going to be the longest example, you guys. The rest will go a lot faster. But this is just to start the video out. If you play for a much wider angle, this is more like 40, 45 degree cut here. The cue ball is actually lower on the table. Oh, the cue ball is lower on the table than the 8-ball, right? If you draw a line, the cue ball is lower on the table. And this makes it much easier for the cue ball to naturally come off the rail, or naturally come off the 8-ball and move into a zone that matters. Now, some of you will say, what if the cue ball goes too far? A scenario like this and learning like this really comes in handy because you realize you only need the top part of the ball. Sometimes what the table gives you is enough to make it work. So instead of worrying about how much space you have to cue, just worry about having enough angle. Again, it's more than 30 degrees there. Having enough angle to move the cue ball naturally. Learning, reference lines and how much the spin affects the cue ball off the rail, depending on the cut and depending on the speed. Those are all things that you can learn with a variety of different drills. But these examples are just to show you that you are not playing for enough angle to move the cue ball. So I have a few other scenarios to go over here, but hopefully the message is resonating. There's gonna be times when playing the natural path of the cue ball is favorable, and then times where the sliding path of the cue ball is more favorable. Just like that stunning shot with outside spin. But that choice comes down to how you feel in the moment and knowing where you can get your cue ball. There are times when multiple right answers are great for you, and sometimes when you kind of have to play just what the table gives you. Part of what makes pool so difficult is the decision making. That's why I'm partnering with brands like Keto Brains. Now, they may not be a pool brand, but get off my back about it because they have become a pool product for me. They make a nootropic coffee creamer that I've been using for years to get rid of jitters and gives you focus and calm while playing pool. I got a 20% off discount for you guys. Just use code Sensei at checkout. You can purchase it from my link. It supports the channel. It doesn't cost you guys anything. All right, let's get into another scenario. Okay, back in it, we have a completely different layout now, still 9-ball. This 7 to 8 is a little interesting because you have to play backup table for the 9-ball, and the 7 is a little thick. You can have some room to cut that ball, but it is a little thick to really easily get to the right side of the 8-ball. So if the 8-ball pocket line is here, and you need to be on this side of the 8-ball, that will easily move your cue ball down table for shape on the 9. So what are the ways that we can do this? Let's take a look. One of the ways is to forcefully stun the cue ball over into that zone, which is what I think I do here. Yes, it is. Takes a lot of speed control, hitting the right part of the pocket, stunning really well. That's not a bad option, but I got there kind of by hitting it exactly the way I needed to hit it. So let's look at other options that take the cue ball on a more natural path. You could go forwards, but then the issue with this is that you now need much more speed control because again, that 8-ball pocket line is here. If the cue ball needs to be in this zone to get over, what are you gonna do when you don't hit the cue ball right? Crossing the line of position here. It's much more difficult to get the right speed. And if you get too thin, maybe that's fine with this shot, but again, these are scenarios that you are supposed to take learnings from to adjust for other scenarios that you're gonna see in a real game. In this position, there are two options. You could try to just completely spin the cue ball off of this rail as much as you can over here and get like some sort of thin cut on the 9. Takes a lot of speed and a lot of finesse because the harder you hit this ball, the more the cue ball wants to travel that way. And the softer you hit the ball, the less speed it has to travel this way. And I do this again, but now I shoot 3 rails around and I had to really, really pound that ball. So what are the other options then? Well, you could always draw the cue ball and get an angle on the 8. Granted, shooting the 8 into this pocket means that the tangent line is very, very close to this pocket. The tangent line is something like this, right? So now I have to be very careful with how I shoot this 8 ball. I have to either stun draw, or I have to stun run through with side spin to get the cue ball here and then spin it out. And that's very, very difficult to do. I managed to handle it, and the cue ball sort of managed to slow down just in time, but it's really difficult to do that. And the reason I'm going through these draw scenarios, you guys, is because they each give you something very different to look at. Yes, you could get straight in, and yes, you could draw straight up table, and that makes it easy. But I see this so often. I see this so often. Other amateur players, when they play shape, getting on the 6 or the 7 to the 8, they play for this really full angle to draw straight up table, but it's really finicky. What if you get here, just like that last example? It's very difficult to get away from that. So I'm lucky that I got super straight here, where I can just draw the cue ball straight back. Easy to handle that. However, let's skip ahead because we know I do it fine. Okay. However, if you overdraw this ball, forgive the bad acting, if you overdraw this ball, what are you left with? What are you going to do? You're going to back cut the ball here and go 3 rails around short side? Are you going to try to draw so what I mean is back cut here and try to go 3 rails like this to the short side of the 9? Like, that's so difficult. Or are you going to back cut and try to draw the cue ball from here as it curves to the long rail and try to spin the ball back up table? You could do that. It's very difficult with this kind of angle, and these conditions make it possible, but is not something that I suggest. I think what I try here, if I remember correctly, is I try to shoot the 8 ball here and I go 3 rails around for the 9. Yes, that was the goal, but then things got out of hand and I scratched. So the reason you don't want to draw the ball is because anywhere that you draw the ball that is not perfectly dead straight in, you're done. It's like very, very difficult to get on the 9. And this is where I see many amateurs are playing for, just a straight draw shot when they can't control the cue ball perfectly every time. It's just very difficult to do. You see a lot of pros avoid that for good reason. Okay, moving on to the next version of the shot. I promise we are very close to being done with this shot on the table, or with this example. So here I rolled the cue ball forward, and the reason I roll the cue ball forward is to get an easy angle to cut this 8 in the side and use the natural rolling ball to get shape on the 9. You guys, Niels Fine has an amazing video on playing side pockets this way. What's the phrase? Don't play shape when you already have it. The natural rolling ball off of the 8 is going to get you shape on the 9 as long as you get the right angle here. If you're too thin, then maybe, let's say the cue ball ends up going here, right? If you're too thin like this, then the angle off of the 8 is very, very difficult to get position without crossing right in front of the 9 and coming back out, or using spin to, hold this angle short side. I think that playing the cue ball further up table like this, the way it is here, and then just using a natural rolling cue ball, nice, sweet, medium stroke, don't have to force anything. Let the cue ball travel the way it wants to go. Just like the last example, you want to let the cue ball travel on its own. I think I want to make a video on playing shape for side pockets because, as you can see, it can get kind of wild pretty fast. There's a reason why Earl Strickland hates playing side pockets. Now, there is more I could say about this last scenario, but I think I'll move on in the interest of time. Okay, moving on to this next example. Let's just take a look at the layout real quick. Take a look at the 8 ball. Take a look at the 8 ball and the 9 ball. They exist on opposite sides of the long rail, opposite sides of the table, sorry, on the long rail, both hugging the long rail. The 9 ball's pretty tight to this long rail. So playing short side from the 8 is not very easy for shot making to actually run out this 9 ball. So most players are going to want to draw and spin this cue ball back above the side rail, or above the side pocket, to play shape on the 9 here. That is the goal. I think that is the right spot to play this 9 ball. The issue is, with where the 7 ball is, you're going to have not a lot of angle to get more angle out of the cue ball, right? So this cut shot, let's take a look at this cut. Full at the 8 looks like this. So I'm cutting maybe 10 degrees or so to the pocket. If I can just barely dribble this 7 ball in and stay here, a lot of people will say that's a good enough angle. But what happens when you actually get the cue ball there and you say, oh, there's some angle, I can work with that? That's not enough angle, you guys. That's just simply not enough angle to move the cue ball to the other side of the table. I have to pound this ball, and still, not only do I miss, but I don't move the cue ball enough. So what are the other solutions? Let's say I get that same kind of angle. I think this is a little bit flatter even. The only real solution here, besides, drawing the cue ball back this way, which requires a huge stroke, is going forwards. And that's what I do. I go forwards, running with high left to force the cue ball into this zone. But bad acting. The right way to play this is by stunning the ball. This is as close to a draw shot as I'm comfortable shooting here, because in order to really pull back the angle and get a larger angle on this shot, you would need to move the cue ball with more speed. So instead of getting the cue ball here, the cue ball would have to, come further up the table, and that just makes this zone very difficult to shoot the 8 from. So what I do instead, just soft stun it. So I have some angle, right? This is about 30 degrees, maybe 25 degrees. It is difficult. I think I moved the 8 back into the spot where I marked. It is still a difficult shot, but sometimes you gotta, just take what the table gives you. Take your medicine. But notice how I did not have to pound that ball in. I can just smooth the ball in, and it works. This is a very short in comparison to the other examples, but this is just to show that sometimes you gotta take what the table gives you. As long as the angle is workable, use it. Try not to do too much. This will increase your chances of running out dramatically. All right, we're gonna do one more scenario, and because I know a lot of you play 8 ball, we're gonna cover that. And it's very often in 8 ball that it's the traffic on the table that's causing these end game failures. So let's look at this common scenario. Okay, looking at this pattern, this is the pattern I choose to play. Yes, you could play the 12 ball first. You could play the 12 ball here and then, move the cue ball 2 rails out to get shape on the 14, or, stun draw it out to get shape on the 14. That's a little dangerous with the side pocket there. Or you could, stun roll it out to this part of the table and then try to roll the 14 in and get shape on the 8. It's difficult regardless of what you choose to do. I chose to shoot the 14 ball because I think a lot of amateurs would choose to shoot the 14 ball here. And then this is the scenario that they get themselves in. Playing the 12 ball, you can either draw for shape like this. Here I'm getting a slight back cut angle. I think what I have to do in this case is force the cue ball forward. And that takes, a lot of power, a lot of precision, a lot of tip placement. It's not the easiest shot. Even though I pull it off here, it's really not a high percentage run out, if I'm being honest. You could play for the other side of the 12. So this is still a drawing angle. But if I do this, look what happens. Those object balls become much bigger. Now take a look. This is very important. On a big table, this might not seem like a big deal. But on a smaller table, on a bar box, 7-foot table, what leagues are played on, most leagues, these object balls are so much bigger, right? The traffic becomes so much more dense on a smaller table. That's also why I love bar box 8 ball. Figuring out solutions like this become much more important. So if this was on a bar box, very, very likely if you're trying to draw the ball, this is what's happening. Oh, I think I try this draw shot one more time just to try to get this angle. So if you're gonna draw off of this ball, right, hits the rail and comes underneath this 1 ball towards the 8 ball. This is really not a large channel, you guys. This is a small space to get the cue ball traveling in. And then because you're coming across the 8 ball line, here's the 8 ball pocket line, right? You're coming across this line right here. So the positional zone that you're playing for, you know, you're coming across the thin side of the positional zone, right? It's very, very difficult to make this kind of draw shot work. And this is what I see from amateurs all the time, trying to play these speed shots, drawing the cue ball to a precise point, and it's always more difficult than it looks. And you always get a scenario like this where you can't run out from here. So what are the other options? If you move forwards, if you roll the cue ball forwards and get a shot on the 12, people say, oh, that's a little too thin. I don't like being that thin. Playing for a thin shape does not mean you're going to sacrifice your shot making. And the reason I say that is because when you play for a thinner shot, it allows for easier cue ball movement. More energy goes into the cue ball, which means you have to strike it less firm, which reduces a lot of those cueing and stroking flaws. This is one way to get out. But if I'm being completely honest, this is not the most optimal way to get out. I know a lot of you are probably thinking that this is a way that you could get out. And while true, that's a big pocket. Any lower than that, you are sending the cue ball much higher up on this second rail here. And that means that your speed has to be perfect to even get on the rail with an okay shot at the 8. And if your speed isn't perfect, then you have a very thin cut on the 8 to get out. The other option is to do what I did and then draw past the side pocket. But to really do that well and not hit the 1 ball here, that's, you know, especially on a smaller table, that's very difficult to do and not a lot of space to do it. There is a drill that allows you to get better at that. It's called the ladder drill. I think I'm gonna do a video on it. I love that drill. But in terms of, you know, playing for position to use that zigzag shot to get out, it's difficult to do that, guys. It is not as easy as it looks. It's easy to scratch. What happens in this version? I think I run into the 5 ball, that's right. And I missed the shot. It's just very difficult to control this, you guys. So a lot of you are screaming at me right now, dude, go 3 rails around. And the answer to that is, yes, of course, that's the solution. But you have to know that you need the angle to move the cue ball. And let's say this 1 ball isn't here, right? If this 1 ball isn't here, or you replace the 1 ball with the cue ball, if you're shooting a cue ball from here, it takes so much more effort to force this ball around this table, right? But what I was saying about playing thin enough angles to let the cue ball do the work for you is that it allows you to play 3 rails with inside like this much, much easier. So it looks like big cue ball movement, therefore big stroke, therefore difficult shot. I promise it is not as difficult as the other solutions here because you are making it easy on the stroke and you are compounding difficulty every time you try to really force the cue ball. Because you're not forcing the cue ball here, it makes it easier to get out. If there is a skill that you need to learn as a consumer of pool content, is that when you're watching a video like this to learn versus watching just to consume, there's a big shift in that mindset there. You guys, these solutions are not specific to the scenarios I laid out here. It's not exclusive. A lot of the shots that I play here that get me good position, they are actually core shots that show up over and over and over again that I've learned on the Slate Billiard Club with my coach, Dimitris Gelatis. And learning the details of what angles to look for, knowing what side spin to use, how that affects the cue ball, how that affects speed, using reference lines, all the rest. It's all stuff that's very difficult to learn on your own, especially with a mindset focused on consuming rather than learning. But if you have learned something here, like, subscribe, comment. If you would have run any of these layouts differently, please let me know in the comments. I read everything. Thanks for watching. Happy shooting.